Welcome, everybody, to the NDC Partnership's second Youth Engagement Forum on the topic of inclusive finance. My name is Julianne Baker Gallegos. I'm a country engagement specialist with the NDC Partnership, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. We have already hosted two of these sessions, one in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, and another in Asia Pacific region last week. So I'm super thrilled to kick off this third and final session today for the LAC region. As we begin, I would like to share guidance on how we will run the events. We have live interpretation available today in Spanish and in French. In your Zoom toolbar, please click the globe icon and select your preferred language. While listening to the interpreters, you can then select mute original audio, so the main presenter is then silenced for you if you're having issues listening to the interpreter. If you have technical issues at any point during the event, please use the chat feature. And with that is located in the Zoom toolbar, a member of our team with the NDC Partnership will be able to support whatever your needs are. The event is being recorded and will be shared on the other virtual platforms after today. With those quick housekeeping notes, we would like to begin the event with a video message from the NDC Partnership's co-chairs. The Right Honorable Alok Sharma, COP26 President from the United Kingdom, and Senator the Honorable Matthew Samuda, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation from Jamaica.
Ladies and gentlemen, as co-chair of the NDC Partnership, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Youth Engagement Forum. The NDC Partnership is critically important. Over 115 countries and more than 80 institutions joined in a global coalition working together to drive transformational climate action. Just the type of climate action that we saw 8 months ago at COP26, where, under the UK stewardship, almost 200 countries agreed the historic Glasgow Climate Pact. That pact forged a path to a clean global future and kept alive the possibility of limiting the rise in average global temperature to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Of course, much has changed in the months since. We meet against a backdrop of multiple global crises, much precipitated by the Putin regime's brutal, illegal, and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And even as we deal with these immediate challenges, all the evidence makes clear that the chronic threat of climate change is getting worse. The need for action is becoming increasingly urgent. We must deliver on the commitments we made in Glasgow. Nationally determined contributions are central to this work. In particular, every country must respond to the call to revisit and strengthen their NDC as they committed to do in Glasgow. And they must do so not at some vague point in the future, but this year in 2022. And the major emitters, the G20 nations, must lead from the front, particularly those countries with little or no increase in ambition since Paris. These NDCs, along with the long-term strategies for how to deliver them, need to be submitted before the UNFCCC's synthesis report deadline of September the 23rd. The NDC Partnership allows countries to access the support they need to develop and implement these commitments. And I was proud to announce at last month's Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda that the UK is doubling its contribution to the Partnership Action Fund to £10 million. And I would encourage countries to use that resource. And I also want to emphasize the vital role that young people have to play in pushing countries to be more ambitious in their NDC and indeed across the climate action that they're taking. Young people were at the heart of so much of what we achieved at COP26. The collective call to action of hundreds of young delegates pushed parties forward. And through the NDC Partnership support, young people were directly engaged in NDC enhancement. Out of the 67 countries supported by the partnership, 46 made their processes more open to input from youth stakeholders, and 42 directly addressed the needs of young people. So your participation in the work to tackle the climate crisis was and remains essential. You can hold governments to account, pushing us to go further and faster. And I'm confident that you can and that you will shape the future. Thank you.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to join you today digitally. The crisis we face with climate change is indeed the great challenge of our generation. Young people have been dealt a bad hand. The issue, the crisis, and the impact of climate change will unfortunately be with you for your lifetime. It is precisely why the NDC Partnership has convened this group of young people to ensure that as we tackle this issue, you are not just a part of the solution, but you are active in crafting the way forward. The NDC Partnership has been very successful in mobilizing countries through their leadership, global NGOs, and indeed financing partners to ensure that climate contributions are heading in the right direction. But there's much more to do. It is through the voices of young people in every generation that solutions have been found and global leaders have been forced to commit. There can be no doubt that we require mass mobilization of climate financing. Developing nations like Jamaica are indeed willing to do what we must by way of climate action. We're putting in place steps for mitigation, we're putting in place plans for adaptation. But there has to be a massive increase in the deployment of capital from more developed nations. And this is why we have invited you here today. Because though the NDC Partnership, the UNCDF, and other global partners are working around the clock, we need young people like yourselves to not just lend your voice, but to be a part of the planning. The scale of the problem we face demands a massive upscaling of climate ambition. But beyond that climate ambition, we must ensure that developing countries such as Jamaica take advantage of the newly launched NDC financing strategy. We had the opportunity to launch that strategy under the auspices of Prime Minister Andrew Holness here in Jamaica. But strategy action and participation of young people.
Apologies all, we are having some technical issues, but we're about to move on to a very inspiring few words from Miss Una Mae Gordon, the Principal Director of the Climate Change Division within the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment, and Climate Change in Jamaica. We are super excited to kick this off with your conversation, Una Mae, and also building on these inspiring words from our co-chairs.
Thank you, Juliana. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me.
We can hear you perfectly.
As I explained, I'm in a very precarious position. Young people in the house, greetings. I'm on vacation, but I could not miss this opportunity to be here with you. So on behalf of the co-chairs who you heard from before, but we are the ones that are in the trenches on behalf of my colleagues in the UK and myself. And on behalf of the partnership and our youth representative from Jamaica, Dana-Lynn and Daniela, we are excited to welcome you to this second annual Youth Engagement Forum. And this year, as you know, focused on inclusive climate finance. In Jamaica, we have a saying, it takes cash to care. As you all know, the NDC partnership, and I'm sure you have heard this many, many times, but I'll reiterate it. It brings together more than 200 members. That's a powerful organization involved in 120 countries, of which Jamaica is one. And these are developed and developing countries. And we have more than 80 institutions to create and deliver an ambitious climate action that helps achieve more fulsomely the Paris Agreement, but on a broader scale, the Sustainable Development Goals. Meeting the, as you heard Minister Samuda, he was trying to say that meeting the challenges of climate change means empowering and supporting all countries to deliver on what we believe now is the low emission climate resilient basis. And this requires ambitious NDCs, and you all know what the NDCs are expected to deliver. And it needs investment on a vast scale to implement mitigation and adaptation action. So we are here today in recognition of the powerful role that you as young people play in driving climate action and channeling your experiences, drive, and the innovation that comes with being young, the thinking into financing for NDC implementation in the years to come. We are very, very proud as a partnership of the what we lovingly call the YEP, but the Youth Engagement Plan, which was co-created by more than 475 young participants and 46 members to drive active participation of young people in member countries and global NDC partnership activities. We believe that the YEP embodies at the core values of the NDC partnership. It is country-led, it brings together partners of diverse perspectives and experiences, it promotes inclusive decision-making processes, and it mobilizes actors that can have a major impact on NDC implementation and enhancement. You as young people play a very vital role in pursuing governments to raise climate ambition and increase their climate finance commitments. Your voices and platform are critical in driving behavioral change by raising societal awareness and citizens' activism. And for me, activism is critical. In Jamaica, most of you know, Jamaica has a really very active climate change youth population that are integrated, involved in the climate change processes and decision making. We have the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, which is popular, you all know them. We have the youth entrepreneurs developing adaptation technologies for reducing GHG emissions and advocating for greener, more resilient communities. Youths are involved at the stakeholder consultation. All our stakeholder consultations are given space and room and opportunities to represent Jamaica. They are on our delegations to the COP and the UN General Assembly. And we recently launched in Jamaica, led by Jamaica, the Young People for Action and Climate Change, which is building a coalition across the region for youth climate justice, the Youth Climate Justice Coalition. Mobilizing finance is really, really complex. But as I said earlier, it takes cash to care. And to accelerate access to finance, we need to collectively increase our efforts to close the gap between financing the country needs to implementing the NDCs and the enabling environments and projects pipeline that financial institutions and investors seek. To bridge this gap, the NDC partnership offers a range of services, and I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with them for supporting policy frameworks and integrating NDCs into national development plans and budgets, to supporting NDC investments planning, identifying NDC-aligned projects, and mobilizing effective sources of finance. The YEP and this forum are starting points for greater action on youth engagement in NDC implementation. Today, we will hear challenges, opportunities, and identify areas for further training in this shared path for inclusive climate finance. Together, We are supporting young leaders, expertise on financing to combat the climate crisis. We all have the responsibility to ensure that future generations who will live the climate crisis are equipped with the skills and capacity they need to drive the necessary transformation. The NDC partnership, our partnership, is committed to ensuring more inclusive, impactful, and ambitious climate action now and for the future. And we look forward to a really interactive discussion over the next week, beginning today. Thank you very much. And as we said, this is your partnership. Young people in the house, big up yourself. Thanks again. Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you so much, Uname, and it's such a pleasure to be able to do this with somebody who has experience as a youth leader yourself. So we really appreciate your leadership and commitment to strengthening the youth engagement plan and supporting all of this work on climate finance. Okay, everyone, so we have a very dynamic agenda today, and I'm going to refer to my notes here to make sure I don't miss anything. We are super excited to bring you very qualified and experienced and inspiring leaders to speak about what their experiences have been with climate finance. Please use the Q&A function to share any questions you have for the panelists and moderators. We will be showing a lightning video that it will tell us some of the key takeaways from a recent webinar that Irina hosted on the role of finance for youth actions. We will then have a 2-question poll where we will gather additional insight from everyone in the audience before the closing remarks from a youth climate champion. Afterwards, we're going to switch over to a separate Zoom link for an hour-long teaching session where you will have 3 choices of workshops with partners doing extraordinary work on the ground. If you haven't already, please go ahead and register for those teaching sessions using the link that has now been added to the chat. All right, before we kick this off with all of the interesting conversations we have coming up, we're going to have some of my colleagues from the NDC Partnership Support Unit tell you a little bit more about climate finance. Handing it over now.
Welcome to this event. I am Jesus Alvarado, Climate Finance and Analysis Specialist with the NDC Partnership Support Unit, and I'm joined today by my colleague Guli Sabahi, who is our senior advisor on climate finance at the NDC Partnership Support Unit. So thank you all for joining. The climate crisis is one of the biggest challenges of our time, especially in most vulnerable countries and low-income countries. Without external support, many countries are often not able to afford the cost of actions addressing climate change. And this makes climate finance a critical vehicle to help countries avoid and reduce emissions, as well as to adapt to the dangerous effects and impacts of climate change. Today, we will do this Climate Finance 101 through an interview with Guli to explain what climate finance means, the status of climate finance globally, and the NDC partnership work on climate finance. So, Guli, let me start with the first question. Can you tell us about what climate finance means?
Thank you, Jesus. Climate finance refers mainly to investments and other financial resources directed towards, number 1, climate mitigation to avoid and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and 2, climate adaptation to build resilience to climate change impacts. Most of the countries now have NDCs, national determined contributions, which are national strategies that include mitigation and adaptation targets of a country. Climate finance is used to help countries meet those NDC targets through financing NDC-aligned projects and actions to achieve the long-term objectives of the Paris Agreement. To understand climate finance, it may be useful to look at it through its 4 key dimensions formulated by the CPI in their reporting on climate finance. And they use the broadest definition of climate finance. Number 1, on sources. They include public sources like government budgets and institutions funded by governments, and private sources like private banks and companies. They can also be domestic sources generated within a country, for example, from national development banks or local companies, or international, coming from outside the country, from multilateral development banks or international commercial banks. Instruments, the second dimension. There are many different instruments through which climate finance is channeled. Some of the key examples include grants that typically don't require repayment. They also include debt that requires repayment and doesn't usually tolerate the risk of non-repayment. Concessional debt refers typically to debt at rates below market rates, and non-concessional debt refers typically to debt at market rates. Equity is another important example. That's the riskiest form of capital that expects repayment, but can take the risk of non-repayment. You also need risk insurance and guarantees to protect these investments. We need a combination of these different forms of capital and tools to come together, for example, through blended finance structures to fund NDC-aligned projects. Third dimension, uses. Climate finance, as we discussed, used primarily for mitigation and adaptation, or the projects that have a dual benefits, both mitigation and adaptation benefits combined. Fourth dimension, sectors. Most of the mitigation finance currently is in renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors. Low carbon transport is the fastest growing sector. Mitigation investments in hard to decarbonize sectors like infrastructure and buildings remains low. And on adaptation side, the largest share of finance is going towards cross-sectoral activities as well as water and wastewater projects. Over to you, Jesus.
Thank you very much, Guli. And thank you for this comprehensive overview. Could you please quickly review for us the status of climate finance globally, both in terms of opportunities and gaps?
Absolutely. And looking again through the CPI's latest report on climate finance flows for 2019-2020, you will see that total climate finance has increased over the last decade, reaching $632 billion US. But flows have slowed in the past few years, and this is a worrying trend. CPI reports that there is a need of increase of at least 590% in annual climate finance to get us on the track. About 51% of climate finance comes from public sources, mostly development finance institutions, DFIs, and other 49% from private sources, mostly private companies. Flows from all sources need to increase. We all know public finance alone cannot fund climate action. Private finance is instrumental, and scarce public finance sources need to be deployed effectively to increase and mobilize private finance, particularly from institutional investors and other providers of capital that have some of the largest pools of capital. In terms of instruments, the debt at market rates, our non-concessional debt, remains the largest source. There is a need to increase other forms of financing, such as grant financing, particularly for adaptation projects, as well as equity and loans at rates below market rates, or concessional debt financing. In terms of uses and sectors, most of the climate finance was used for mitigation. Although investments for adaptation have increased, they remained far below the scale required. This imbalance between adaptation and mitigation finance can in many cases be explained by the fact that mitigation projects, they generate revenues or create cost savings and are therefore more economically attractive to investors and lenders. Whereas adaptation projects, they have benefits for the society at large, but they may not have ability to generate immediate revenues for the investors and lenders. And that's what makes mitigation projects more bankable, more attractive to banks and other investors for loans and other financing. Over to you, Jesus.
Great. So can you please tell us about the work of the NDC Partnership in supporting countries to access climate finance?
Sure. The NDC partnership, through its members, supports countries to implement their NDCs by establishing plans which translate NDC targets into specific projects and actions that require funding. Many members of the partnership include developed countries, multilateral development banks, and other development finance institutions. And their support is critical for developing and financing NDC-aligned projects and incentivizing private investments in those projects. In our work, we try to help bridge the finance gap, focusing on issues on the demand side, on the government side that demand and need financing, as well as the supply side on the sources of financing. We have recently launched our finance strategy, and this slide shows some of our key offerings for developing countries. It's important to note that each of us plays a key role in bridging the finance gap, and it all starts from having a solid understanding of climate finance issues. So we appreciate you joining us today. Hope this was useful.
Thank you very much, Guli, and thank you for the audience. And we look forward to staying connected and continue with the rest of the event. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all again so much for joining us for the second Youth Engagement Forum. We are very excited to gather new partners today, continue to grow our youth network, and build capacity through the teachings that we will be hosting a little later on. Today, we hope you will be inspired by all of our presenters. And right now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Maya Delaney. Maya is an MBA candidate at the MIT Sloan School of Management. She is a summer associate at Poseidon Capital, and she is an associate with the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. Maya, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julianne, and thank you very much to everyone who has joined this incredibly important event. As was mentioned, my name is Maya Delaney. I'm a graduate student at MIT, and I've been working with the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, which aims to develop finance and insurance products that enhance coastal resilience. And I've very intentionally focused on this intersection of finance and ocean conservation because I'm from the Bahamas, which is a country where economic growth and social advancement are absolutely dependent on the protection of our natural resources. And so this theme of interconnectedness is very similar to what we see in terms of the crux of climate change. And addressing climate change will absolutely require cross-sector partnerships to adequately meet nationally determined contributions. And climate finance is a necessary piece to unlock many of the solutions that we need. And as we just heard in the presentation, we know that climate finance is currently lacking. And so my area of expertise has been on the private finance side of things. So before handing it over to the panelists and starting that discussion, I'll just say a few words and share some interesting statistics that I like to keep in mind. So despite this interconnectivity across, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, we still see a significant chasm of investment activity between the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that are most targeted by impact investors and those that are least targeted. For example, SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, is targeted by more than 70% of impact investors. SDG 13, which is climate action, falls in the middle. It's targeted by about 50% of impact investors. But when we look at SDG 14, which is life below water, or SDG 15, which is life on land, both of them are respectively targeted by about less than 20% of impact investors. So what we see here is a significant annual conservation investment gap as well. And so research from the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, showed that current annual investment in conservation is only about $52 billion. Whereas what we need in order to appropriately preserve and restore our ecosystems is about 300 to 400 billion. So we know that finance is key for conservation. We also know that finance is key for climate goals, and it's also key for achieving our NDCs, which encapsulates, of course, climate and conservation. I'm really looking forward to today's panel, and I have the pleasure of asking a few questions. And just to introduce some of the panelists, we have Ms. Maria Gracia Campos, we have Mr. Maximo Mazzocco, and Ms. Joyce Mendez. For today's session, I'll first ask each panelist to introduce themselves very briefly, and then I have a few questions that I'll ask every panelist before turning to the audience for their own questions. So I'll start with Ms. Maria Gracia Campos. Just a quick 1-minute introduction, please.
María Gracia, te piden una introducción. Si puedes cambiar el mute y presentarte.
Good morning. My name is Maria Gracia Campos Ventemilla. It is an honor to be with you this day, speaking on a topic as important as youth participation on climate finance policies. I am young representative in the Climate Change Commissions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next is Mr. Maximo Mazzocco.
Hi, how are you? Thank you very much for inviting us. I'm going to try to speak slowly to facilitate the work of the translators. Thank you very much for the translation. I'm Maximo Mazzocco, UNDP Generation 17 Global Ambassador, founder of EcoHouse Global, that is an action for sustainability youth-led nonprofit with more than almost 40 projects at local, regional, and global level, and many political achievements. And also I am co-founder and member of several youth federations, networks, and initiatives, and member of the Youth for Climate Advisory Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, our third panelist is Ms. Joyce Mendez. An introduction, please.
Ba'Asia pa, or hello everybody. I greet you in Guarani, which is the native language from Paraguay, and I'm really happy to be part of this panel. So, well, I'm Joyce Mendez. I'm a migrant youth. Originally, I was born from Colombia. My family belongs to the Wayuu communities of the north of the country, and then my family migrated to the border of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, where I've been working for the last decade for Transboundary Youth Cooperation in water, energy, and the food nexus. At the moment, I'm a climate consultant at UNICEF Paraguay, and we're working in young people's advocacies in climate change. And well, I'm a social activist and climate activist since very like 10, 15 years ago, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, everyone. And it really is a pleasure to be sitting among colleagues and peers throughout the region who are all doing this work. So I'll start with a few questions for each of you before turning to the panel. So first to Ms. Maria Gracia Campos. What does it mean to you to lead by example when it comes to meaningful youth engagement in the financing and the implementation of NDCs, nationally determined contributions?
María Gracia, aquí la pregunta es, ¿qué significa para vos? No sé si lo estás escuchando también en tu interpretación, pero ¿qué significa para vos? Ah, sí, ok, listo.
Thank you. The question, Peru has a National Commission on Climate Change. It is a permanent space throughout which the public sector and civil society monitor compliance with public policies on climate change, as well as the international commitments assumed by the state before the United Nations framework conventions on climate change in order to prepare proposals that contributed to the state's decision-making on climate change. The National Climate Change Commission is structured as follows. The formal participation of young people in the Technical Finances Commission considers the needs priorities of June regarding climate investments. We are two representatives of the June driving group is the technical committee. Currently, the work plan is by debated. In the consultation developed in the process of local conference LECOI 2021, the Peruvian youth emphasized the need to prioritize investments in transition projects during renewable energies, education, and in the proposals to stop deforestation fires and the degradation process. This year, we are again promoting this process, whose objective is to transfer the declaration to our regional authorities and the national level on the investment projects that the youth weigh over others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. And one thing that you said really stood out, which was that so much of this work has to be done in consultation with participation of local youth. And so, Maximo, I'm turning to you now. A question that I have is, from your experience working in many different aspects of climate action, where are young people best placed to have an impact on these global discussions around climate finance?
Very good question. Thank you, Maya. In my humble opinion, youth is best placed everywhere right now because we have energy, we have innovation, new ideas, and we have also, and most importantly, the right to decide our present and future. After 15 years of been working towards sustainability, I usually clarify that I'm speaking in a context where we are almost 8 billion people, and we are not only in a brutal climatic and ecological crisis, but also economical, political, social, ethical, sanitarian. And on this scenario, almost half of world's population is younger than 35 years old. So actual youth and every new generation that comes next must participate in the big decisions that we or they are inheriting. If we are talking about NDC and financing, I want to give an example, a simple example of a G20 country like Argentina. I'm from Argentina. And in my country, as many other countries, half of population is poor since many years ago, and a large part of the other population struggles every day to cover the human needs. So if I live in a context where in my surroundings, in my city surroundings, 7 out of 10 children are poor, and of course, we need to understand the consequences of that for a country, this happens in many countries, or a region in terms of any kind of development. And we also have 30% annual inflation, etc., etc. In this context, nevertheless, we have assumed a commitment by 2030. I want to connect this with the NDC. Can anybody or anyone think that this will really happen in 90 months? Because 8 years, 7 years are 90 months. Without any help, without any kind of another kind of finance. With the economic crisis that we are experiencing, that is one of the worst in our history, we should invest minimum 5 or 10 points of our annual GDP to reach that goal. We can extrapolate the same example to many countries. That is not happening. So we need to think outside of the box and realize that we cannot continue doing the same things we want if we want different results. And youth is so important for that because of what we said when I start talking. Innovation, new ways, energy, intergenerational work, not one against the other, but together. And now it's not only activists, environmentalists as before. Now lawyers, politicians, businessmen, everyone is getting involved in this topic. So we have a great opportunity, and there are a lot of ways that we can act towards sustainability.
Thank you, Maximo. I agree with you entirely that youth have a right to be involved in the direction that things are heading in terms of coming up with solutions. And you propose solutions of your own, hypothetical ones, for example, committing finance that matches a certain proportion of a country's GDP. And so thinking about even developing those solutions, that requires a level of expertise to be built up, capacity, knowledge building. So I actually have a question for you, Joyce, specifically looking to climate finance as a knowledge and capacity gap that may exist right now. What resources or skills could be provided to help youth better understand and access that finance?
Sure. So as a personal perspective as well, I've been working with several indigenous communities across Latin America and in accessing water and energy sources. And it's we have, as Maximo said, the creativity, the ideas, the partnership, but it comes down when, okay, where are we going to get the financing? How can we, find this? And that is such a big gap if we compare like rural to urban youth and also vulnerable youth. And so I really love the words of the ministry when it just says takes catch to care. And in this regard, I will say, well, first we need to know where to access to this finance as youth, obviously not just as a government, but also as youth. And we are also saying as decentralized movements, as initiatives, as maybe not registered organizations, which were the case of the last mile communities and the communities that are being impacted directly for climate change as well, and how to do this, how to access to this money. And then we see there are some materials, some focus for youth, but they are also in other languages like English. And so we need to as well decentralize and translate and make this more available in several languages as well. Because as we know, the fact that we are speaking here in English, we are an exception, but if we go back to our communities, is a different reality. And as well, we know we need to have as well technical support and guidance in the process of implementation of that certain finance. And also like understanding that, yeah, we have the energy. And so how we pass from the protesting to the proposal part, and the financing is the bridge, is the gap among these two kind of actions. At the same time, it's like we see that with financing, we can leverage as well community participation, and especially, again, I mentioned vulnerable youth. And it was very curious during now the course of Climate Financing 101, regarding the difference of mitigation and adaptation funding. And we realized that, especially with Latin America, I'm talking to you right now from Paraguay, we're supposed to be in winter and we have a temperature of 32, 33 degrees. 2 days ago, we got in the north of the country, 39 degrees during winter. We are like being completely affected. And then it's not just, oh yeah, we need finance. Yeah, we do. And also we need for adaptation. How we train youth as well to develop financing skills towards also adaptation, climate adaptation programs. So that's kind of my perspective.
Thank you. You've given us a roadmap or a pathway to how to bridge some of that knowledge gap and how to get closer to those solutions. You said needing to know how to access it, where it is, ensuring that everything is accessible because it's translated in every language. And surely I'd imagine there are some cases of success stories. And so I want to go back to you, Maria, and I'd love to hear if there are any examples that stand out to you of young people developing and financing bankable projects for climate action.
There may be a slight delay as Maria gets her translation. Maria, la pregunta es, ¿sí la escuchaste?
No.
Ok, te pregunta que si tenés ejemplos concretos de proyectos que sean, digamos, bancables o que puedan servir para inversión de juventudes que están pudiendo desarrollar ese tipo de proyectos. Y puedes contestar en español y te ayudo felizmente con la traducción.
Ya, perfecto, gracias. Sí, de parte del equipo de financiamiento climático en la Comisión Nacional de Cambio Climático, como jóvenes, recién nos hemos insertado en esta comisión y como tal se está implantando, se está perfeccionando el plan de trabajo. En ese espacio como tal, nosotros hemos propuesto dos cuestiones. La primera es sobre la rendición de cuentas a través de
si me das un espacio, perdón, me das un espacio para traducir rápidamente. Gracias. So from the direction of climate change, we have been working together, organizing to implement two specific things. Adelante.
Ok. En primer lugar, la propuesta de una auditoría verde. Si bien existen ejemplos.
The proposal to audit, like to do a greening audit.
No existen ejemplos en Latinoamérica y África, pero un caso a ejemplificar es de Bangladesh.
There are no concrete examples from Latin America and Africa, but there is one in Bangladesh.
La Oficina del Contralor y Auditor realiza auditoría a todas las cuentas del gobierno, incluyendo la de los ministerios.
The Office of the Auditor and Controller does audits of all of the different agencies in government.
Y agencias de gasto para determinar el uso económico, eficiente y efectivo.
And in agencies to determine the effective and efficient use of. ¿De qué?
De financiamiento climático.
Of climate finance.
Y hemos solicitado esa propuesta para que pueda desarrollarse en Perú por primera vez. La segunda propuesta.
And we've requested that so that it can be developed in Peru. The second proposal is
trabajar un tópico relacionado a un mecanismo de financiamiento autónomo de los pueblos indígenas.
The second proposal is for us to develop a mechanism to provide autonomy for indigenous communities and peoples.
Esta propuesta la estoy trabajando con la comunidad Huampi, es un gobierno autónomo, es una nación autónoma.
I'm working on this proposal with a Huampi community, which is an autonomous nation.
Su pedido fue trasladado en la conferencia de las partes, en la COP26.
Their request was submitted during the last COP.
Sin embargo, hasta el momento no han tenido respuesta del gobierno peruano y vamos a trabajar para que este proyecto y propuesta sea una política de Estado en finanzas climáticas.
However, we have not yet heard from the government of Peru. nonetheless, we will continue to work towards making sure that this can be something that is taken seriously in our proposals for climate finance.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. You have hit on the complexity of stakeholder engagement and the fact that there's youth engagement that's needed, but also collaboration from government is needed in making sure that we include and involve perspectives from Indigenous communities and Indigenous people as well. There's a lot of complexity in terms of getting to these solutions. And Maximo, with that idea in mind, I'd love to hear from you, how can government or ministry leaders bridge the gap between private climate finance and youth-led climate engagement?
Oh, the gap. Money is not reaching to the people in the worst scenarios and in territory. That is a sure thing. There is a gap of philosophies and paradigms between generations. The gap we can see it in manners, in technology, in relationships, in ethics, in the care for nature. I asked many times to different ministers of different countries and even presidents what development means to them. And we are not in the same line. We are totally not in the same line. I will give you an example. We have many initiatives of laws of sustainable finance and another kind, for example, the environmental impact assessment law. But if we approve that, again, imagine we approve the environmental assessment law and every project, for example, of the construction sector, that is one sector that is not very good for the emissions right now. Okay. In Latin America, 20% of jobs, directly or indirectly, are from construction. So imagine that every building or whatever should stop until we do the environmental impact assessment, and we really do it with an audience, with a public consultation, with everything that we should do, not only a paper that says, okay, everything is okay here. How would that impact in economy? The finance, the people that put the money will put money in projects that in 5 years will have the return of the earnings. Okay, so we have a huge gap between philosophies and a lot of contradictions because we do not know how exactly to do it worldwide. That's a conclusion. Because the thing is that we have to change the economy. And luckily, since many years ago, thousands of projects are trying to change the game. We have projects that only loan money to sustainable initiatives, for example. We have climate tech and ecotechs that use blockchain and innovative technology to restore and conserve biodiversity, among others, to do a collaborative way of finance, decentralized. The thing is, if governments would like to do that, the private sector, we know that have more money, they can use it however they want, they can use it quicker than governments, and almost every big government has companies behind them. They are not like, I cannot be president if I do not have the private sector with me financing my campaign. So for me, in my humble opinion, education is the key here. Education for sustainable finance, education for a sustainable way of living, education for sustainability. That is the key. We should work very, very, very hard in that among other stuff. But if the people do not realize that they are putting money in banks, that the bank then loan that money to agrotoxics, to fossil fuels, to something that do not go towards sustainability, I'm an activist and I put money in the bank because the system says that I have to put money in the bank to work in or to do a lot of stuff. And the bank is loaning my money to things that I do not concur. Nobody is asking me, hey, we are going to use this money for this. So we need to change this financial system, of course, if we wanna do a really climate action and get to the point where all the commitments are accomplished. Sorry, I think I spoke too much.
That was perfect and very thorough. Thank you. And I'll turn now to Joyce with my last question before some audience questions. So this is just a bit of a reminder to, if a question comes to mind, feel free to put it in the chat. And in just a few minutes, we'll be coming to you for those questions. So Joyce, we heard from Maximo on a lot of macro level changes and opportunities for engagement, but I would love to hear from your perspective some examples from Paraguay. Can you share how Paraguay and other countries in the region are taking steps to emphasize youth engagement and inclusion in NDC processes? Are there successes that can be replicated across the region?
Sure. So just for you to have a panorama, because like that's the question that sometimes I get asked the most, like, why involving youth people, young people in all of this? Why not? Especially in Paraguay. So 50% of the population, and we're talking about a population of 7.1 or 2 million inhabitants. So 50% of the population, we are under 30 years old. So if we don't include you, there is no transition. And the government knows this, that the company, everybody knows this. So it's been a process because we've been like since activists, and at the beginning it was this kind of perspective of, oh, you're too young, maybe you don't know what you're doing. But throughout the years, we created a lot of partnerships, especially like the youth. We have amazing activists who are like really, we are from the rural, the urban, well, we are migrants, even indigenous peoples. So how things started pretty much with like the youth. We started organizing some like activities, obviously capacity building, awareness raising, and then we were like directly going and talking to the government, showing, okay, we have an let's say ELCOE, please recognize it as a matter of importance for the environmental minister, for the Minister of Youth and Minister of Education. So we were reaching more and more young people. And at the moment we have the Youth for Climate Action Network, but at the same time as well, we got support from UNICEF in creating this a climate consultancy project from the ADAPT office as well from New York, and it's been applied in Paraguay. So we have this program of young people's advocacy in climate change. So that's what we're working at the moment. And we are actually, we have the mapping on who's doing what, like the youth organization. We have the key actors, and UNICEF is supporting us to sit at the table as well with decision-making processes. And because sometimes we realize that throughout the time that partnerships are really fundamental, and that we don't have the time. I mean, 7 years, we have pretty much to limit the increase of the temperature beyond 1.5 Celsius degrees. So we don't have the time to create the wheel. So we are actually bringing the parts together and in advancing, and at the same time as well, we got support, and we are in conversations at the moment with the National Direction in Climate Change. And during this process as well, something very interesting happened. Like we are developing as well a project that is called Operación COP, and we're gonna include 4 young people into the country's delegation to be negotiators in these years in the COP. And this is kind of the first time we're going to have so much young people being in part of the country delegation, taking decision making processes. But at the same time, we have decided with youth to impact on the National Adaptation Plan and some of the NDCs. So at the moment, we are doing this consulting work because But we had an analysis and we did a study. We did our work as youth. We analyzed the updated indices, and we realized pretty much that in the part of the consultancy or the process of the NDC making process, there was lack of youth and children being consulted and being taken as well into account as like actors on the region. It is being recognized as a vulnerability, as that we have vulnerability as vulnerable groups. However, we need to take this word, but also involve it in to get involved in the next indices updates, but also in the national plans. And last but not least, as well, we as a couple of years ago, I remember I went as an activist to the Ministry of Environment, and I asked in the adaptation section, what can we do? And they sat with us and they show us the plan, and they said, look, youth are pretty much our arms where we can reach, and you are in those last mile communities. So it was very accessible since the beginning to say, we want to work with you. If you need anything, we can train you, we can support. And they're being really partners since the beginning, in the workshops and everything. I have so much to say, but now I know it's the time limit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just one more reminder about if there are any questions in the chat. Of course, I have many questions. I can keep going. So I guess as we start to wrap up, because we only have a few minutes left, one last question that I have for all of you, and I'll include my own response at the end too, is how you chose to even get involved in this work in the first place, what that pathway looks like for you, and where you hope it will go in the near term, say the next 5 to 10 years. Because obviously, I think across the four of us, there's a lot of passion behind the work that we do. And I think we are all from a region where the climate challenge is one that's very personally felt. And I'd imagine that goes into it. But just in your own words, how you even decided to get involved in this work. Also, what we each do is slightly different. So there's so many different angles to youth engagement. It looks different for everybody. So I think just for our audience sake, it'd be helpful to just know on a personal level what it's been like. So, and I'd say for order, we can start with Maximo, and then we'll go to Maria, and then we'll end with Joyce and me.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for my colleagues. I always believe that actions speak louder than words. So next step is action, proposals. I believe that youth already said a lot, not enough, because we will never stop saying. But we are trying to download that to the ground, to actual proposals of energy transition and a real transition to a new way of doing things, a new economy, or many new economies, because we are different and we embrace that in this new era. We love to be different, because if we are different, we have more chances to have new ideas and be more resilient. So next steps for me and the groups that we are working is to propose, knock every door and communicate through every channel we have, proposals, actions, how we can change this situation. Let's work towards that. Not only say everything that is wrong, everything that is bad. Proposals. And how did I get inspired? Since I was, I don't know, a teenager, I traveled through my country and I saw the biodiversity dying. I was almost assist necromancy. I believe it's you can say that in Spanish. I don't know, but like autopsy of different species, dolphins among others, and I saw the plastic and the garbage inside their bellies, and I said I have to do something for that. And also I grew up in a country with half population more or less poor, so if we do not get involved, it's like, what's the meaning to be here? If we can, of course, if we can choose something. Not everyone can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maximo. Maria, the question is how you got involved in this work, as well as what you'd hope for in the next few years.
Te pregunta que cómo decidiste involucrarte en este tipo de trabajo y qué ves en tu futuro.
Sobre la pregunta, pienso que hay muchas cosas por hacer, pero necesitamos identificarnos con un problema.
There is a lot to do, but we need to identify with a specific issue.
Al identificarnos con un problema, vamos a tener claro dónde trabajarlo. En mi caso, a mí me interesa la política. Muy de joven pude estar en un cargo público a nivel local.
So just focusing on what specific issue we can focus our energies on. So in my case, I was always interested in politics and I could engage in a public position from a very early age.
Y aprendí que es muy difícil cambiar la realidad.
And I learned that it's very difficult to change any reality.
Se necesita trabajar con aliados estratégicos, pero sobre todo trabajar en colectivo.
You need to
de mano a mano.
You need to work with partners, but most importantly, you need to work, it's basically strength in numbers. You have to work in unison with a lot of people hand in hand.
Por eso el primer paso que creo deben asumir los jóvenes es involucrarse en política.
That's why I believe that the first step that youth should take is to get involved in politics.
Es toda temática, en específico, el financiamiento climático es un tema político.
Climate financing is a political issue, and everything ends up being a political issue.
Una vez involucrados, necesitamos innovar, tener nuevas ideas para romper, vencer las barreras estructurales que nos están impidiendo la transición justa ecológica.
And then once we're involved, we can get creative, we can be innovative and think through ways in which we can adjust or break those structural barriers that are not allowing us to have this fair and just transition, ecological transition.
Trabajar con las comunidades, quienes están aclamando ser escuchadas y no lo son.
And work closely with the communities that are unheard and no matter how loud they get, are not being listened to.
Creo que al elevar sus voces en conjunto, junto a ellas, vamos a tener esperanza.
I think if we are able to amplify their message and work with them to do that, we have hope.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Joyce.
Sure. So in my case, I didn't have a choice. Basically, we come from a region that, and nowadays with the geopolitical perspective, there is a lot like a carbon mining, coal mining. So we had to migrate. And so I was at an early age a climate migrant. And then I came, like to live in the Teja de Aguas, or the land of waters, how we call it, the triple border. We have the Iguazu Falls, the Paraná River, Iguazu River, and the Guarani Aquifer. So we were very aware about the importance and the need, the relationship with water. And I always had my family's perspective as well, in the kind of in the working towards the logic of nature and not imposing it. I remember my grandpa, our grandparents were already zero waste. He was like, you need to be in charge of the waste you produce. He was telling me this as his indigenous perspective as well. And so growing up as an urban indigenous person, I had all these kind of, multicultural perspectives. And when I was doing renewable energy engineering, we were just studying about like hydro dams and everything. But at the same time, I found the gap on the climate justice, the environmental justice perspective, the gender. So me as a indigenous young woman migrant. There was a lot of constraints at the beginning in order to impact. However, there were a lot like partnerships and support. And right now people ask me, why don't you go to another country? That country is just gonna get very complex when in margins of temperature. And I just don't want to be migrating my whole life. I want to have my life here. I want to develop, more projects, and we don't have a choice if we don't adapt to climate change. So it's not a choice. It's not been a choice for me, and I believe it's not for many million people from around the world. And as Massimo says, not everybody can take action or be full-time into this. So the ones that we have, we need to leverage the action, decentralize, and be very inclusive.
Thank you. And I'll just share my perspective as well, which really is very similar to everyone's that we've heard. And then I'm told we have one question as well that came through from the Q&A, so I'll wrap up with that one. But I chose finance because I knew that there was so much opportunity for my own country, the Bahamas, to have a very outsized impact on climate change. We know that sustainable ocean solutions alone can contribute up to and potentially over 20% of the emissions reductions that we need to prevent catastrophic climate change. But I was tired of constantly hearing investors say, well, in the Caribbean, projects are too small, or there's not enough of a pipeline in the Caribbean, there's too much risk. Very tired of hearing people say that over and over. And so for me, I've tried to commit myself to making sure we find ways around those knee-jerk visceral reactions that folks sometimes have. And so for the vision of what I hope would come next, I hope that we see a more self-reliant and prosperous future for our countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I hope that we see a future where we are more resilient to climate change, we're able to protect our livelihoods, also because we've shown that all of that can be done in harmony with good business practice. And that's actually a very strong investment opportunity rather than one that should be approached with caution. So that's my own perspective on that. And the last question that we have is, in Ecuador, we are trying to attract financial investment. However, the current projects are basic when we need industry, manufacturing, etc. What are your thoughts on how to promote better projects and boost sustainable development? I'll leave that open to any one of you to answer if there's a response that jumps to mind.
La pregunta es, en Ecuador están teniendo dificultades a veces movilizando recursos para proyectos y están preguntando cuáles son sus ideas o sus propuestas con base en su experiencia para agilizar esos procesos.
Hola, ¿me escuchan?
Sí, perfectamente.
Bien. Sobre eso hay una propuesta que me parece importante señalar respecto a las deudas que tienen los países en vías de desarrollo. Yo sé que Latinoamérica tiene una deuda climática, una deuda de los países desarrollados, y creo que no va a ser posible una transición mientras que nuestros países, además de tener una deuda como tal, una deuda externa que pagar, tengan que seguir invirtiendo en proyectos de mitigación, de adaptación. La transición es enorme.
Un segundo.
Como tal el desafío. Hoy. Hola.
Perdón por interrumpir, pero es para poder traducir. So there is a real issue in Latin America with a lot of countries having immense debt, and it's very hard to imagine them investing in adaptation or mitigation projects when they have this debt accrued.
Por ese motivo, a nivel de las negociaciones climáticas, es necesario pueda transarse estas deudas climáticas de los países del norte global a mitigar y adaptar con proyectos, mediante proyectos, de manera financiera, de tal manera que los países puedan eliminar esa barrera de la deuda externa que tengan. Otra de las propuestas que se planteó, por ejemplo...
So it's important for countries in the global north or developed countries that have this climate debt to be able to address that through financing support in the developing nations so that this isn't a blocker for them. And so that there is, and you know, like the climate justice aspect of it is basically addressed between that accrued debt, financial debt, and the climate debt that's been accumulated elsewhere.
En el caso de Perú, por ejemplo, no existe un enfoque territorial al momento de garantizar el financiamiento a los sectores que existen, a los diferentes sectores, ya sea a nivel de adaptación, de mitigación, bosques. Por ejemplo, en el caso de bosques, ha ocurrido algo insólito, siendo el Perú Amazonía.
So for instance, in Peru, we don't have specific investment opportunities for across different sectors. So there's this one unique case of something that happened in the forest. Peru is part of the Amazon. She's going to tell us.
El área temática del uso y el cambio del uso del suelo y silvicultura USCUS ha suponido un 57.3% del total de presupuesto en mitigación en los últimos años.
So the budget for the LULUCF sector has been 57.3% for the past few years.
Sin embargo, ese presupuesto no se ha concentrado en atender a los departamentos donde existe deforestación, sino se ha concentrado en la capital, en Lima, donde evidentemente no existe ese problema.
Nonetheless, that budget has not been focused on the areas that are most affected by deforestation and all of these other issues that pertain to the LULUCF budget. Instead, it's been spent in Lima, which is the capital.
Y se ha abandonado a los departamentos donde sí existe deforestación y otros problemas relacionados a minería ilegal, a las agroindustrias. Por ejemplo, en los departamentos de San Martín, Loreto, Ucayali, tienen la mayor pérdida de bosques, sin embargo, no se ha priorizado la inversión en bosques en esos lugares.
And so the sectors that are dealing with the highest rates of deforestation have been left abandoned. The three specific towns that you mentioned or areas, Loreto and I can't remember the other two, but we can get her to confirm later, have all the highest rates of deforestation and there's no actual funding that's being geared there. Adelante.
Existe, por lo tanto, una responsabilidad de los países del sur global de crear políticas que se ajusten a sus realidades, pero también que puedan canalizar el financiamiento los mismos actores perjudicados, es decir, las mismas comunidades deban de manera autónoma manejar su presupuesto.
So we have this proposal to have the actual communities that are being most affected by these things to actually have the ability to use these funds and leverage them.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we've reached the end of our session. So thank you for everyone who has joined. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for very thorough responses and also for just a very connected discussion. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I know there's still more on the agenda, so I'll turn it back over to Julianne as we switch to the remainder of today's session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all so much. And I'm sorry, Massimo, you weren't able to get your 2 words in, but I hope we can get there a little later today or maybe via direct messages. So thank you. Thank you, Maya, for the important points you raised and for the stimulating questions. And special thanks to Maria Gracia, Massimo, and Joyce, because I think the points you make about the importance of engaging youth across scales to be able to effectively develop an inclusive climate finance model are key. Having said this, we do recognize that this is only a small subset of the hundreds, hopefully even thousands of advocates, entrepreneurs, and activists that work on these issues daily. to try to make finance more accessible and inclusive. So to expand on all of these discussion points, we're going to now turn to a brief overview of the key takeaways from a recent IRENA Global Council on Enabling Youth Action for SDG 7 webinar, which focused specifically on the role of finance for youth action on SDG 7. Turning that on now.
The IRENA Global Council on Enabling Youth Action for SDG 7 held a webinar to demystify private and public climate finance. During this webinar, several ideas regarding youth support and youth action funding were shared. Recognizing that the outcome of this meeting will contribute to the 2022 NDC Partnership Youth Engagement Forum, it is necessary to highlight the most important points from this discussion. The importance of youth engagement in the climate action agenda was emphasized, the role governments play in elevating youth voices within the international energy and climate agenda spaces, leveraging youth's unique perspectives, creativity, and digital skills is of particular importance.
However, there are still gaps in youth participation in engineering, innovation, and entrepreneurship. As a result, relevant stakeholders must increase their collaboration with young people and provide them with the necessary knowledge and skills to advance their engagement in the international energy and climate financing arena. In line with financing youth projects, participants also advocate for accessible financing from government and multilateral financial institutions to meet their needs. Notably, it is essential to raise awareness and implement policies that facilitate engagement between youth and relevant stakeholders. As we strive for a transition that is both sustainable and equitable, we must consider technical and gender dimensions every step of the way. To this end, we look forward to engaging in the 2022 NDC Partnership Youth Engagement Forum.
We really are hoping we can inspire a lot more discussions and workshops like this. I can't tell you how important it is to get all of you on the same page talking and moving things forward. So with this, I would like to wrap up inviting our Global Director of the NDC Partnership, Paulo Vieira, to share some of his closing remarks with us. Thank you, Paulo, for your support. I'm a witness to the fact that you've been supporting our youth work from the beginning, and it's very much appreciated. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julian. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Buenos días a todos. I hope that you have been enjoying this incredible conversation. I am truly delighted to be providing closing remarks for today's session, which marks also the end of the 2022 Youth Engagement Forum. It has been truly wonderful to participate in the conversations that have taken place today and over the last week, and to be part of the youth-led discussions on this very critical topic. There is so much innovation led by young people like those participating today that it is truly very exciting to see that being highlighted in our conversations. The NDC Partnership encourages members to incorporate relevant action in their country or organizational context and collaborate across the partnership to strengthen youth engagement in NDC action. The partnership strives to play a supportive role to increase knowledge sharing, communications, and collaboration around youth engagement with all our members. In the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, we support 30 countries in their climate action goals. And we have seen promising strides taken by governments to engage young people in various aspects of their NDC enhancement and implementation efforts over the last years. For example, the Bahamas recently hosted the Regional Conference of Youth and is offering training and networking to Bahamians that will be supported in its pathway to COP27 by bringing strong voices from their youth. In addition to what was shared by Maria Gracia earlier today, Peru is developing a course for teachers on climate change to reach young students. Belize has plans to reach young population with awareness-raising campaigns in the agricultural sector. And countries like Grenada, Jamaica, and the Bahamas have involved young people in the planning and updating of their new NDC submitted to the UNFCCC over the last year. And just last week, the Dominican Republic brought the voices of young leaders to the Latin American Caribbean Climate Week. As our Jamaican co-chair, Una May, noted earlier, we look forward to continuing to build on the youth engagement plan that was created with all of you, with our country partners, mobilizing actors that can have a major impact on NDC implementation and enhancement. I also recognize that the conversation today is very complicated, and that in previous sessions, we have highlighted the roadblocks to achieve the inclusive climate finance that is needed at greater speed and scale. It is very clear from what we speak to country governments, to the youth, to civil society, to everyone, that climate finance is the biggest challenge that countries currently face to implement their climate commitments. There are substantial challenges to making opportunities for youth engagement obvious in climate finance discussions, and to reinforce the participation of youth leaders in public and private finance. We've heard the importance of education around climate finance and the need for training and skill building. Speakers have called for the recognition that youth are not a homogeneous block, and their needs around financing and participation will be different, and we need to adjust to that. Additionally, guidance on funding calls need to account for young people's potential lack of history or experience when considering investments. Other sessions have highlighted the need for collaboration with governments in the revision and implementation of their NDCs, or in creating youth-tailored funds for climate action. As seen in other aspects of the broader climate finance challenge, there is a need for support for early funding, including mentorship and training to ensure youth-led organizations or projects can take their venture to the next level. The discussions today and over the last week are just the starting point, or a platform. We only had a short time to hear from experts in the field, but we hope to continue these conversations, bringing in the insight you have to offer your communities, your countries, and the region. We hope to continue supporting necessary capacity building to create a pool of future climate finance experts and leaders. Young people play a powerful role in driving climate action, and as we've seen here today, we need to channel your experiences and ambition into all aspects of NDC implementation. I want to close by thanking you for your very strong contributions to this conversation, and thanking the support unit of the NDC Partnership for preparing this very impressive second Youth Engagement Forum. We will report back to our steering committee, and we will present the results of these conversations at COP in Egypt, and we will have more opportunities to engage with you all then. And of course, we will continue our continuous engagement with you over the next months so that we can move forward this agenda with you as a cornerstone of our efforts. Next year, we'll have another Youth Engagement Forum, maybe focusing on something else. So be out there looking for opportunities to engage with the partnership and its members. We would be very happy to host you and to have your inputs into all our work. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the week. Back to you, Julianne.
Thank you, Paulo. So as has been pointed out several times today, the financing gap is going to be a critical challenge going forward, and the involvement of youth across decision-making is imperative for us to be able to address the climate crisis. We truly, truly hope that today served as inspiration for you to engage, to get proactive, to lead with your own actions in your communities. There is always more to learn, and we truly believe that education is key to enabling that next step towards action. So we now invite you to dive deeper into subjects related to climate finance by joining one of our teach-ins. Specifically, you can see the registration link that's been shared in the chat. So if you haven't yet registered for them, we encourage you to register right now. Once you're there, you're going to have 3 options for workshops to join. One is going to explore how NDC analysis on youth sensitivity supports youth advocates to engage on climate policy. The other is going to tell you about important knowledge and skills that are key to climate action. And then finally, there's a dive into the engagement with the UNFCCC climate finance work programs that UNGO is going to lead. These teach-ins are officially wrapping up our session today, but we ask that you stay in touch with us and continue this conversation amongst yourselves especially. Thank you once again to our fantastic youth leaders. It was really a pleasure to learn from your experiences. And thank you especially to the leadership and co-chairs for understanding the importance of youth speaking at across all levels and the importance of engaging them in these processes. Thank you to our audience for joining today, and please keep doing this important work.